nerd cred is not really a concept that I believe in. But if I did, I think one of my only real pieces of it would be the fact that I have seen every film ever released by Studio Ghibli. Yes, that includes Ocean Waves, and Pompoko, and Tales of Earthsea, and even My Neighbors the Yamadas. I've seen every single one, and I love almost all of them to some degree. I don't really say this to brag. Well, I do, but not just to brag. I say it more to lend context to the fact that I feel like I know exactly what kind of tone Ghibli films tend to bring to the table and why they feel so unique compared to other films. Seeing as video games have a rather large overlap with anime, it's probably safe to assume that most are already familiar with Studio Ghibli, but let's give a brief recap for those who aren't. Studio Ghibli is an animation studio that was founded in June of 1985 by Isao Takahata, Toshio Suzuki, and Hayao Miyazaki, following the major success of Miyazaki's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind in 1984. Their debut film, Castle in the Sky, hit theaters in 1986 to critical acclaim, and from there the hits just kept on coming. Grave of the Fireflies and My Neighbor Totoro in 1988, Kiki's Delivery Service in 1989, Porco Rosso in 1992, Princess Mononoke in 1997, Spirited Away in 2001, Howl's Moving Castle in 2004, Ponyo in 2008. Part of me wants to just sit here and list out their entire filmography, but I won't. The point is, they are one of the most prestigious animation studios not just in Japan, but in the world, with Hayao Miyazaki specifically being one of the most well-known directors in his field. One of my favorite aspects of Ghibli's output is the fact that their films are a little hard to explain. They're not enjoyed in the way a typical film might be. In most films, there is a central goal that the protagonist is striving to achieve, and there's usually an antagonist whose objective is to prevent them from achieving it. Ghibli films, especially those by Miyazaki, don't really tend to have either of these things, and even when they do, they aren't really ever the focus of the movie. The focus is instead on the tedium and everyday struggles that surround that goal. Take Spirited Away, for example. Protagonist Chihiro has the clear overall goal of saving her parents and escaping the spirit world, but the movie is way more focused on the day-to-day business of Yubaba's bathhouse and Chihiro's experiences while working there. Saving her parents is more of an afterthought for much of the film. That's an area where Ghibli excels, taking the tedium of life that we as normal people in the real world find familiar and presenting it alongside the fantastical elements of magic and spirits. Yes, Kiki is a witch who can fly on a broomstick, and you probably can't do that. I sure can't. But the obstacles she encounters throughout the course of the film are ones that you might know quite well. This balance gives these films a cozy tone that not many other movies are really able to pull off, and call me crazy, but I've always been kind of interested in the idea of how well this tone might translate into a video game. That's what I thought we were going to get when it was announced that Ghibli would be collaborating with Level 5 for an RPG. There are few games I've been as ravenously excited for that have then turned around and disappointed me as heavily as Nino Cooney, Wrath of the White Witch. Never before have I felt so let down by a concept that should have been tailor-made for me, a trip through a Ghibli-designed world with a soundtrack by Joe Hisaishi himself. I should have loved Nino Cooney, and I tried so hard to love it, but I just couldn't. I don't think I could really recount my many gameplay problems with it. I haven't touched it since dropping it back in 2013, but I feel like I can still point to my biggest problem. The game just feels like a JRPG that happened to have been worked on by Ghibli artists. Films by Studio Ghibli feel like movies nobody else could make, but Nino Cooney felt like a game that anybody could make. Nino Cooney didn't have the Ghibli feeling I had been looking for, and I kinda gave up on the idea after that. That is until a couple weeks ago when I sat down and poured a significant amount of time into Spiritfarer. Spiritfarer is a game that is not going to be everybody's cup of tea. It's made up of a lot of busy work mixed with a good amount of waiting around. If I had to come up with a comparison to other games I've played, it feels very similar to what would happen if you smashed together Stardew Valley and Wind Waker, but as you've probably guessed by now, I think it's the closest we've ever gotten to a playable Studio Ghibli film. In Spiritfarer, you play as a young girl named Stella who finds herself given the important position of ferrying the souls of the dead in order to help them pass on. She obtains a boat, travels the fantastical islands of the new world around her, and just generally lives her life surrounded by people she will inevitably have to say goodbye to. There's already comparisons I could draw from just that. I could compare Stella to Chihiro in that they're both normal people thrown into a fantastical new environment. Or I could compare the scattered and patchwork appearance that your ship eventually takes with its many differently shaped houses and facilities to the strange patchwork appearance of Howl's castle. There are a lot of connections to make in terms of the game's overall aesthetic, but I'm more interested in how the gameplay nails the same feeling of watching a Ghibli film. Spiritfarer, much like the films I'm comparing it to, is a game built around a charming and familiar sense of tedium, with small pockets of excitement built in. You will rarely find yourself hyped or excited to perform an action in Spiritfarer, but you may nonetheless find yourself immersed in the casual cycle of watering crops, cutting wood, smelting metals, and performing small tasks for the spirits that reside on your boat, all while simply waiting for your boat to reach its destination, an act that can take several minutes on its own. It supplies you with ample time to just sit and take in the experience. The routine in Spiritfarer isn't exactly carefree, but the conflicts that do exist are merely a backdrop to getting to know the people you come in contact with, making it hurt all the more when you have to say farewell. It's the same feeling I get from watching Kiki's Delivery Service. I might not know any giant frogs with a love for pork chops, but the struggles Atul talks about are things that I feel I can relate to. They're struggles you might actually encounter in the course of your life. Spiritfarer even nails one of the other important aspects of a Ghibli story: melancholy. Alongside his favorite themes of nature and flight, Miyazaki often includes themes of saying goodbye in his films, though not usually to specific people. Some of his most famous films are themed around the idea of growing up, and how tragic it is that society tells us that we have to get rid of our childlike wonder along the way. Spiritfarer might not have quite the same theming around its melancholy, but I feel like you can definitely see some comparisons. Stella is almost always wearing a smile. She always seems excited and gives off that same childlike wonder that Ghibli employs so well. She's smiling even when she has to say goodbye, and this game makes you say goodbye quite often. It pulls this feeling off so well that I even found tears welling up when bidding farewell to characters I didn't particularly care for, because even they find a way to worm their way into your routine and thus your heart. Since its release, Spiritfarer has been praised and criticized for its gameplay, but it's easy to forget that sometimes tedium is not a bad thing. Tedium, when done right, can draw you into a world so much more than extensive world building or a massive lore dump. Because at the end of the day, tedium is a real part of everyday life. And yes, sometimes you need a dragon or lightning bolts to liven things up a bit. Much like real life, a game cannot survive on tedium alone, but also like real life, sometimes those moments need to be few and far between. Studio Ghibli has a firm grasp of this concept. Life isn't always an exciting adventure, but it is an adventure nonetheless. I think the folks at Thunder Lotus understand this too, and I hope at least a few studios out there are taking notes.